Raising Vermont's minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2024 took one step closer to reality on Tuesday, February 26th, when the state Senate endorsed the idea and sent the legislation over to the House of Representatives. A similar piece of legislation was met with a veto by Governor Phil Scott last year. Currently, Vermont's minimum wage is $10.78 an hour and is on an inflation-based trajectory to reach more than $12 an hour by 2024 under the current schedule. The minimum wage has been a hotly debated subject for a while now. Advocates for the measure say it will boost the state's economy by giving fatter paychecks to low-wage earners, which they are likely to spend, and the money will circulate through the state's economy. Opponents, however, fear that's a wage scale that will be unaffordable for many businesses in Vermont, particularly in rural areas and for smaller, often family-run businesses. Another factor is that neighboring New Hampshire's minimum wage is only $7.25 an hour, which is also the federal minimum wage rate. Most states, however, offer higher minimums than that. With the minimum wage issue once again back front and center, we talked with two legislators while on a recent visit to Montpelier. Senator Becca Ballant, a Democrat from Windham County, and Representative James Harrison, a Republican who represents several towns just east of Rutland. They had gathered near the State House for a discussion of the minimum wage hosted and organized by VT Digger, the online news-gathering organization, and we talked with them both afterwards about their perspectives.
The most powerful arguments in favor it is that if you look at the low wage and middle wage earners in Vermont, they have not seen an increase in their wages commensurate with the increase in productivity and inflationary increases in decades, literally decades. And you have people working full-time, still working for a poverty wage. And I don't mean that facetiously, like truly a poverty wage. If you look at the number of people who are earning a full-time wage but yet are still needing to take advantage of all kinds of social programs that we have in Vermont to try to make them whole so they can pay for childcare, so they can pay for housing. If you look at wages compared to New England, and if you look at prices compared to New England, we are we're fairly average, really, when you look at the amount it costs to buy goods in New England. Where we have greater costs is in housing in Vermont and in childcare. We've seen, I believe it's a 10% increase in the cost of housing in Vermont, 20% for childcare, and the increase in wages has obviously not kept up with that. So
I look at it a little differently in that the minimum wage is an entry, it's a floor, and hopefully it's something that for many of us, as I did bagging groceries and back in my day, it gave me an entry position to start to gain some skills, and I like to think I got increases in raises as I became more valuable to my employer and I gained experiences. So we have to look at that. If you raise the floor, you potentially raise it for everybody, and conceptually that's not a bad thing. However, there are limits to what we can all afford. You have to be careful. We want to have our cake and eat it too.
The pros and cons were also assessed for us by Heather Wright, an attorney with the law firm Wright Jones Law, which specializes in employment law. One issue she noted was the so-called benefits cliff, where some low-income earners lose state and federal social welfare benefits once they start earning more than a certain amount, and actually leaves them in a worse-off financial situation.
There are, there are many unintended consequences that can come with an increase in the minimum wage rate. And so we want to be mindful if, in proposals and when we look at this issue, as I mentioned, it's rather complex. So we want to make sure that we look at this in a way that takes into account all of those variables. And one example of that, that you mentioned, is the benefits cliff. And what that means is that frequently individuals are eligible for government-funded programs both on a state or a federal level based on their percentage of the federal poverty level. So this would say, people at 100% of the federal poverty level, 200%, 300%. And you lose eligibility off those programs if you if you make more than that amount of money. So if you have a state, like if S23 were to come through and Vermont were to say, eventually our minimum wage is up at 15, we may have increased the amount of income in that household, but they've dropped off eligibility for other benefits, which could have, when you look at the net oversight, actually decrease the amount of compensation, if you will, coming into a home.
On the other hand, had the minimum wage rate, it was originally set at 25 cents an hour when it was first established in 1938, or roughly the equivalent of $4 an hour in current dollars, kept pace with inflation over the years since it was established, it would be between $20 and $25 per hour now. Matt Harrington, the executive director of the Bennington County Regional Chamber of Commerce, noted that Vermont already was on the high end of the minimum wage spectrum and should also be encouraging businesses to move here.
It's not a good thing coming from the employer perspective. I think with this topic, we always have to talk very delicately, because I think, and especially when you speak to Vermont businesses, they're very protective, they're very caring for their employees. And so I think this is always a sensitive topic to them, because I think they want to show their employees that they care for them and that they're paying the right wage. And so I know they go into this somewhat sensitively. All that being said, I think from an employer perspective, and what we would see from a lot of our businesses, and our chamber makes up a majority of small businesses, that this would be quite hurtful for them to move up to $15 by 2024. I know one of the measures that the Vermont Chamber is working on, and we would agree with, is if we are going to do this, to maybe push it off to 2026. Not that we wouldn't increase throughout the years, but we'd have a little bit more longer time for our small businesses to get used to those increases, and kind of span it out a couple more years, which was the original plan. And that also puts us into alignment a little bit more with CPI.
A similar bill passed the House of Representatives last year before being vetoed by the governor, but with fewer Republicans in the legislature this year compared to last, a second gubernatorial veto might not be sustained. The issue is one likely to receive some attention in the second half of the 2019 session following town meetings. Opinion is divided on the issue, and not always along purely party lines. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.